Stop punishing yourself. A Zen story on letting go. Right now, there is a heavy, localized throbbing radiating directly behind the bridge of your nose. An unyielding ache that presses down across your eyebrows like a leaden weight. It is the distinct somatic signature of an accidental misstep, an unintentional mistake that ended up causing hurt to someone else, leaving your mind to circle the wreckage in a state of exhausting remorse. You are caught in a relentless, sharp loop, replaying the exact second of impact, desperately trying to rewrite a past that has already hardened into history. Your forehead carries the friction of this internal court case, holding on to a deep, secret fatigue from acting as both the ruthless prosecutor and the condemned prisoner in a trial that never reaches a verdict. The immediate atmosphere of your room is shifting as the late-night hours deepen into a quiet, charcoal-colored calm. Outside, a gentle, steady drizzle is beginning to fall, the tiny drops tapping a rhythmic cadence against the glass pane and the cold metal of the windowsill. The scent of damp brick and wet earth rises up from the soil beneath your window, carrying a heavy, grounding quality that asks nothing of your memories. The cool linen beneath your neck absorbs the residual heat of your overactive thoughts, while the dark, unmoving shadow of the wardrobe stands like a silent sentinel at the edge of the floorboards. With every slow, unhurried release of your breath, the skin across your brow stretches a fraction of an inch smoother, letting the frantic attempt to undo the past finally run out of steam. You are not broken. What you are feeling in this heavy chamber behind your eyes is not failure, nor is it a sign that you are fundamentally flawed because an action of yours caused an unintended ripple of pain. The profound weight of regret you carry tonight is actually the hidden raw material of an unshakable form of self-forgiveness. Tonight, we will not force your mind to become a silent, empty space, and we will not command the memory of your mistake to vanish into the dark by decree. Instead, we are going to learn how to alter the way your heart relates to a past that cannot be changed. You do not have to solve your whole life tonight, dear friend, and you do not need to fix the consequences of that old event before you are permitted to let your shoulder blades sink down. Right now, in this single pocket of time, nothing is required of your remorse. There is a surprising insight hidden within the old lineages of wisdom that directly meets your current state of exhaustion. The mind does not find liberation because it has finally succeeded in executing a life without errors. True peace begins when you realize that the intense guilt you are using to punish yourself tonight is actually an illusion of control, a desperate subconscious attempt to undo the past by making yourself suffer in the present. We often believe that if we just carry enough pain, or if we replay the accident until our minds are completely spent, we will somehow balance the ledger and earn our right to be clean. But this is the great trap of the remorseful spirit. Trying to hold on to a broken moment is like a person attempting to grasp a fragile clay bowl that has already slipped from their fingers and shattered on the stone floor. The mind frantically tries to hold the missing shape, cutting its fingers on the sharp shards, rather than allowing the raw clay pieces to return to the silence of the earth. Take a slow breath in, letting the cool night air move down through your throat and fill the deep, tight corners of your lower lungs. As you let that breath slide back out into the quiet room, imagine that the pressure behind your eyebrows is turning completely open, letting the sharp edges of that old mistake slip out through your temples like water dripping from a cedar leaf. Maybe you have felt this too, the sudden sharp panic that if you stop punishing yourself, if you let your mind rest before the injury is completely mended, you are somehow condoning the mistake or proving that you do not care. It is an ancient, exhausting pattern that lives in the deepest tissues of the body, telling you that your suffering is the only true measure of your goodness. But Buddhist wisdom points us toward a much more spacious understanding of our nature. The person who made that mistake has already dissolved into the stream of time. Punishing your present body is an act of delusion. In a moment, our path will lead us toward a remote mountain infirmary surrounded by dripping moss, where a young attendant sat by an empty clay basin, feeling the exact same crushing regret that is dampening your spirit right now. But before we journey into that quiet courtyard, allow yourself to notice where your body is gripping its defenses. Let the muscles along the bridge of your nose soften, Let your eyelids rest heavily against your cheeks without any internal squinting, and let your lower jaw drop a tiny fraction so your teeth are no longer pressing together in judgment. You are safe enough to soften right now. The universe will continue its silent turning without your penance for the next few hours. And every clumsy word, every accidental oversight, and every unresolved blame can remain exactly where it is, suspended in the dark. What if the cleanness you have been burning your energy to secure through guilt is not something you must buy with your current exhaustion, but a natural state that returns the moment you drop the broken shards? We spend our nights treating our minds as a courtroom, presenting the same evidence over and over to a judge who never bangs the gavel, hoping to hear a word of acquittal that can only come from our own willingness to yield. We turn our memories into weapons, and then we wonder why our brows feel so throbbed and heavy when the light goes out. The suffering we experience does not come from the simple fact that we made an error. It grows from the internal resistance that refuses to let the past be past. Let another breath arrive on its own time, without you needing to measure its length or control its direction. Let it fill the spaces behind your nose and let it go. You are nothing more than a living form resting in a dark room, completely hidden from the timeline of your old missteps. In the deep silence that is growing between us, the rain outside is washing the slate of the earth clean, asking for no explanations and demanding no sacrifices before it cools the ground. Let your awareness settle into the simple, cool sensation of the linen against your skin, as we prepare to step onto the damp flagstones of the old infirmary, where the herbalist is waiting to show us how to let the spilled water go. Deep within the mist-bound wrinkles of the southern peaks, where the mountain paths grew narrow and choked with wild fern, sat a small, secluded infirmary temple. It was a place of damp cedar pillars and flagstones covered in a thick carpet of emerald moss, built beside a rushing stream whose cold water was used to cool the foreheads of the sick. In this quiet refuge lived Run, a young monastic attendant whose days were spent grinding dried roots and tending the small charcoal fires beneath the copper medicine pots. Rian moved through the courtyard with a quiet, hesitant step, his shoulders hunched slightly as if he were constantly trying to shield himself from an invisible blow. For 3 moons, a heavy, suffocating cloud had settled directly behind his eyes, a localized pressure that never lifted, born from a single, disastrous moment of haste. During the late weeks of the autumn freeze, an elderly monk from the upper hermitage had been brought down to the infirmary, his lungs burning with a severe winter fever. Master Jiku, the old head herbalist, had spent 7 days distilling a rare, delicate oil from the crushed needles of the white cedar, a precious tonic that required absolute precision to compile. On the 8th night, as the patient's breathing grew dangerously shallow, Jiku handed the small stoneware vial to Ryun, instructing him to warm it over the embers before administering the drops. In his frantic urgency to help, Ryun's fingers had grown slick with sweat as he turned toward the hearth. His sandal caught on the uneven edge of a floorboard. The vial slipped from his grasp, striking the stone floor with a sharp, sickening crack, and the dark, aromatic oil instantly vanished into the thirsty cracks between the flagstones. The elderly monk survived the night, but his recovery was severely prolonged, his chest remaining weak and rattled by a persistent cough that echoed through the wooden halls for weeks. Every time that hollow cough broke the silence of the courtyard, a sharp, burning needle of guilt would twist directly behind Ryun's nose, filling his sinuses with a phantom scent of spilled cedar oil. He spent his nights lying awake on his narrow straw mat, staring into the dark timber ceiling, replaying the exact sequence of his stumble over and over again in his mind. He would reach out his hand 1,000 times to catch the falling clay vial, trying to alter the trajectory of the drop, convinced that his clumsy haste had permanently broken the old monk's vitality. He felt entirely contaminated by his mistake, as if his hands were inherently dangerous instruments that could never be trusted to carry anything fragile again. Master Jiku was an elder of slow movements and immense silence, whose presence felt as grounded as the massive granite boulders that flanked the mountain stream. He did not scold Run for the loss of the oil, nor did he offer words of cheap reassurance to ease the boy's misery. He simply continued his work, his ears attuned to the soft, rhythmic gurgle of the water boiling in the courtyard. On an evening when a steady, cold mountain drizzle had turned the moss on the flagstones a deep, saturated green, Jiku called Ryun out to the center of the open courtyard. In the middle of the stones sat a large, coarse, wood-fired clay basin, its rim chipped and blackened by years of exposure to the elements. This basin was typically used to wash the dirt and grit from the raw medicinal herbs collected from the forest floor. But tonight it stood completely empty, its dark interior catching the fine, steady drops of the spring rain. Run stood beside the elder, his fingers clenching the fabric of his sleeves, the familiar heavy throb tightening across his eyebrows as the rain wet his hair. He looked down into the empty vessel, his mind immediately racing back to the night of the spill, wondering if Jiku was finally going to dismiss him from the infirmary for his negligence. Master Jiku did not look up at the sky. He reached down with his thick, weathered hand, picked up a small bamboo ladle, and dipped it into a nearby water jar. Instead of filling the clay basin, he poured a single small splash of water onto the dry, sloping flagstone beside the vessel's base. The water ran instantly into the porous stone, leaving only a dark, irregular stain that began to spread and blur under the falling drizzle. Jiku then handed the empty ladle to Ryun and asked him, in a voice that held the weight of the mountain itself, to gather the spilled water from the flagstone and place it safely inside the basin. Run stared at the dark stain on the wet stone, his voice trembling with a mixture of confusion and unspent grief as he replied that it was impossible, he said. The water had already been swallowed by the rock. Its shape was completely gone, and no matter how hard he scraped the stone, he could only gather mud and grit. He confessed that his mind felt exactly like that flagstone stained by an error that had already sunk into the past, leaving him to scrape against his own ribs until his spirit was raw, unable to undo the damage he had caused. The old herbalist let his hand rest gently against the rough, chipped rim of the clay basin. He told the young attendant that the mistake was indeed, like the water on the flagstone, it had entered the stream of time. Its original form had dissolved, and it could never be recollected by human hands. Jiku pointed out that Ryun's true suffering did not come from the loss of the cedar oil or the prolonged illness of the monk, for those were events that had already unfolded and changed. The agony came from the delusion that he could rewrite the stone by cutting his own fingers on the memory. The master then directed Ryun's attention away from the stain and back to the wide, hollow interior of the clay basin. He noted that while the basin had held many bitter roots and had witnessed many clumsy spills over the decades, the clay itself had never lost its capacity to receive the clean rain falling from the sky tonight. The vessel did not hold a grievance against the hands that dropped it, and it did not diminish its own volume because a previous tonic had been lost. Ryun stood perfectly still in the drizzle, his eyes fixed on the dark, empty circle of the basin. For the first time in 3 moons, the tight, defensive clenching behind his nose began to give way, allowing a long, shuddering breath to escape his lungs. He looked at his own calloused palms and realized that the person who had tripped in the dark room was a phantom of memory, a ghost he was keeping alive through the continuous application of his own shame. The value of his hands was not destroyed by a single broken vial. Their capacity to hold medicine was fully intact in the single inch of time he was currently standing upon. Slowly, the weight of that mountain courtyard moves closer to the texture of your own bedroom tonight, letting the image of that coarse clay basin mirror the exact condition of your own remorseful heart. You have been lying awake, trying to gather the spilled water of an old mistake, scraping against the flagstones of your memory until your brow is throbbed and heavy with the exhaustion of your own judgment. You have believed that if you just carry enough guilt, or if you refuse to let your mind rest, you will somehow fix the injury or prove the goodness of your intent. But the past has already been swallowed by the stone, and your suffering cannot alter its shape by a single fraction. Let the pieces rest where they fell, allowing your awareness to settle into the wide, empty vessel of this present hour, where the rain asks for no penance before it cools the earth. This account of the unrecoverable spill is not instructing us to abandon our human feelings, nor is it asking us to cultivate a cold, unfeeling heart that goes numb to the mistakes we make or the discomfort we occasionally cause others. It is not an invitation to construct an icy wall of indifference, where we no longer care about the consequences of our steps or the weight of our words. Instead, it is revealing an internal shift that is much quieter, a gentle realignment of our inner sight that permits us to recognize an error without turning that error into an executioner's rope. The persistent ache that throbs behind your brow tonight does not stay alive simply because a mistake occurred in the past. The true suffering takes root when the mind insists on holding that past event as a fixed, unyielding monument, using it to define your current worth. When we view this pattern through the soft light of Buddhist insight, we see that what we often call attachment is actually that rigid, defensive knot behind the nose that declares, "Until I can erase that specific second from history, my entire being is stained and broken." It is the unfortunate habit of anchoring our living identity to a choice that has already dissolved into the stream of time. We treat our memories as heavy anchors, dragging them across the delicate soil of our present moments. And when the earth becomes scarred and torn by their weight, we believe the landscape itself is at fault. This is the modern face of craving. It is the restless, Latinite driving that keeps us replaying the old conversation, trying to extract a different outcome from an unchangeable script, hoping that one more repetition will somehow clear the ledger. But the past cannot yield up a different version of itself to satisfy your current longing for absolution. The words have already left your mouth. The clay vial has already struck the stone. The unintended ripple has already moved through the water. When we remain awake to punish ourselves for these immutable coordinates, we are actively participating in a process that adds a second wound to the first. The first wound is simply the reality of human fallibility, the clumsy phrase spoken in tension, the accidental oversight at work, the misjudged step that inadvertently brought distress to someone we care for. These are the natural, painful textures of a world built on limitation. The second wound, however, is the one we strike against our own forehead when the mind turns inward and whispers, "Because you made that mistake, you are a toxic presence who does not deserve to rest." Let this quiet understanding rest next to the heavy throbbing behind your eyebrows right now. Consider what happens when we replace that desperate desire for a historical rewrite with simple, spacious awareness. This quality of mind is not an academic exercise or a difficult meditative technique that you must perform flawlessly before your eyelids can close. It is simply the capacity to look directly at your regret without letting it dictate your entire name. It is the ability to observe the tight constriction in your sinuses, to label it gently as the old habit of self-punishment, and to recognize that the thought is just a passing phantom echoing in an empty room. When you sit with the memory without immediate obedience to its story, you stop feeding the fire that keeps your spirit raw. You allow the spilled water to remain on the flagstone. Completely finished. Impermanence, when translated into the immediate language of your evening rest, becomes an immense sanctuary for a heavy heart. It acts as a gentle reminder that the person who committed that old error is not a solid, unchanging monument trapped in your chest. That version of you existed for a single fraction of a second, driven by a specific collection of fatigue, haste, or confusion, and that person has already vanished into the absolute past. The body lying on the linen tonight is entirely new, its cells unblemished by the old trajectory, its lungs breathing an air that has never been touched by the previous year's mistake. You do not have to force your current flesh to pay the debt of a ghost who no longer lives in the house. True letting go does not mean you refuse to make amends or that you become blind to the lessons your missteps carry. It means you stop using your remorse as a tool to fix a self that was never fundamentally broken to begin with. It means you acknowledge the broken pottery on the floor, look at the shards with a soft, non-judgmental eye, and then allow the clay to return to the silence of the earth without demanding that your fingers bleed as penance. When you drop the expectation that you must be an immaculate creature who never stumbles, you discover that true compassion is the willingness to sit with your own clumsy history and hold it with a tenderness that asks for no transactional defense. In a moment, this path will lead us into a soft, internal practice where we can begin to wash the slate of the mind clean using the rhythm of our own presence. But right now, notice how effortlessly your body is managing its own survival in the dark, completely unconcerned with the errors of your biography. Your heart does not examine your past mistakes before it agrees to beat for you, and your blood does not demand a flawless record before it warms your limbs. You are already being sustained by a deep, natural intelligence that operates entirely outside the boundaries of human guilt, resting securely within a night that requires no explanations before it offers you its peace. If it feels right, let your attention gather very gently right behind the bridge of your nose and along the wide expanse of your forehead. There is no need to actively push away any lingering tension, and there is no requirement to make your thoughts completely still by force. Simply notice the physical boundary where your skin meets the cool night air, observing the subtle weight resting across your eyebrows, as if you were merely looking at a dark piece of slate from a comfortable distance, without any urgency to trace what has been etched into its surface. As you rest here in the deep charcoal shadows of the cooling hour, perhaps you can invite a slow wave of softening to drop down through the deep muscles of your face. Let the small, delicate fibers right between your eyes loosen their grip, and let your cheekbones feel heavy, as if they were sinking naturally into the dry linen beneath your head. There is no pressure to achieve a sudden state of profound emotional release in this moment, and even just recognizing that your brow still feels knotted or tight is entirely enough. You are simply taking stock of your own internal landscape, acknowledging where the mind has been gripping the sharp edges of its old missteps. Right now, let the specific memory of that unintentional mistake float up into your awareness, perhaps a clumsy phrase that left a sting, an accidental oversight that caused an undoing, or the general, heavy worry that you have brought an unfixable cloud into someone else's life. Do not try to analyze the event, and do not try to fix the consequences through internal arguments. Instead, just name the emotional pattern that is currently tightening across your temples. You might say to yourself, very quietly, "This is the habit of scraping the flagstone," or "This is the old courtroom trying to find a verdict." Just by naming it, you are stepping out of the dark, urgent room and standing beside Master Jiku in the damp courtyard, looking at the pattern from a place of unhurried safety. Imagine that your inner life is like that large, wood-fired clay basin resting in the open air while the steady mountain drizzle falls around it. Look at its wide, dark interior in your mind's eye. See how many times you have thrown the broken pieces of that memory into its center today, hoping that each impact would somehow change the trajectory of the original fall. In this quiet space, if it feels comfortable, imagine taking that heavy, dark stain of regret, that persistent wish to rewrite history, and allowing it to rest quietly inside the hollow circle of the basin. You do not have to scrub it clean with your exhaustion, and you do not have to apologize for its presence. You are simply letting the clay hold its weight while you step back into your own breathing body. Watch what happens to the internal space behind your brow as you let the memory sit outside of your identity. Perhaps the image of the coarse clay basin begins to soften its texture under the steady tapping of the rain. The fine, cool drops are falling directly into its dark interior, rippling across the surface, washing away the old dust without demanding that the vessel reshape its walls. The basin does not retain a scar from the bitter herbs it has washed in the past, and its capacity to receive the clean, present downpour is entirely uncompromised by the tonic that was spilled on the floor. If your thoughts begin to drift back toward the trajectory of the falling vial, or the words you wish you could recall, you can return to the simple, rhythmic expansion of your lower ribs whenever you are ready. There is no failure in a mind that wanders back to its wounds. The spring rain does not apologize for wetting the mossy flagstones, and your memories are no different from that changing weather. They are simply events occurring within your vast, unmeasured hall of awareness, and they cannot permanently alter your true nature unless you choose to believe that you are the stain on the rock. Nothing needs to be forced tonight, dear friend. You are not required to empty your heart of its remorse through an act of sheer will, and you do not have to guarantee that your spirit will feel entirely light before the morning arrives. You are simply a living form, letting the heavy, unrecoverable spills of your biography rest on the stone outside your window, while the unmoving dark continues to cradle your shoulders, leaving your inner center wide, receptive, and deeply at peace. Further up the eastern flank of the ridges, where the soil became thin and mixed with sharp slate gravel, lay an old roofless meditation garden that belonged to a community of elderly nuns. It was a stark open-air quadrilateral bounded by crumbling dry stone walls, where the only furniture consisted of several massive flat slabs of dark slate resting on beds of gray river sand. In this exposed courtyard, the changing seasons left their immediate unfiltered marks. The morning frost encrusted the stone, and the spring downpours washed the surfaces clean twice in a single day. Here lived Hannah, a novice scribe whose shoulders carried the rigid, defensive tightness of someone who believed she was one mistake away from complete banishment from the order. A winter ago, while carrying an ancient, irreplaceable silk lineage banner across the courtyard during a sudden mountain gale, Hannah's grip had failed. The wind had whipped the fragile, century-soled fabric against a sharp iron bracket on the wall, tearing the central scroll cleanly in two and scattering the gold leaf characters into the mud. The banner was the heart of the temple's history, and though the senior nuns had gathered the pieces and stored them away in silence, Hannah felt a permanent, heavy iron bar pressed down directly behind her eyebrows. She became consumed by a desperate, perfectionistic panic, spending her waking hours trying to outrun the ghost of that tear, convinced that every small misstep she made was an unforgivable stain on her character. The keeper of the roofless garden was Sister Cian, an elderly nun whose face was deeply lined like the bark of an old plum tree, and whose hands were permanently grayed from the soft willow charcoal she used to document the monastery's daily accounts. Cian did not work on parchment or silk. Instead, she spent her days using a thick piece of rough charcoal to write the lineage records and the names of the dead directly onto the smooth, wet faces of the large slate slabs in the center of the garden. She worked with an unhurried, rhythmic scratch, knowing with absolute certainty that the evening rains would arrive to dissolve every stroke she had placed upon the stone. One afternoon, as a dark violet bank of storm clouds began to spill over the northern ridge, Hannah was tasked with mixing the black ink for the evening chants. Her mind was caught in its familiar, agonizing loop, replaying the sound of the silk banner tearing against the iron wall, trying to find a way to rewrite the past through a frantic, hyper-vigilant attention to her present chore. In her haste to ensure the inkpot was filled to the very brim, her elbow brushed against the wooden stand. The heavy stone mortar tipped sideways, spilling a thick, indelible puddle of black ink across the freshly scrubbed cedar steps of the main hall. Hannah's breath caught in her throat, a familiar, choking wave of hot shame rushing up behind her ribs to lock her jaw in a defensive clenching. Her mind immediately exploded with its old, destructive script, whispering that she was inherently clumsy, that she was a destructive presence in the temple, and that this second failure confirmed her unworthiness. She grabbed a rough hemp cloth and began to scrub the cedar wood with an almost violent energy, her knuckles turning white as she tried to erase the stain before anyone could see it, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. She was fighting the reality of the spilled ink with her entire physical being, trying to force the wood to become clean through the sheer application of her own suffering. Sister Cian walked slowly out of the rain shadow of the wall, her bare feet making no sound on the wet sand. She did not scold Hannah for the mess, and she did not reach down to help her scrub the wood. Instead, she took her own charcoal stick and drew a thick, jagged black line right across the center of the smooth slate slab nearest to the steps, a sharp, dark scar that marred the clean gray stone. Then she laid the charcoal down and reached out, placing her dry, gray-stained palm directly over Hannah's trembling, ink-slick wrist, stopping the frantic movement of the cloth with a light, unyielding pressure. The old nun did not offer a comforting phrase, and she did not tell Hannah that the steps could be perfectly restored. Instead, she pointed her charcoal-stained finger toward the dark, jagged line she had just drawn on the slate slab, while the first heavy drops of the spring downpour began to hit the open garden. She asked Hannah, in a voice that was as flat and unbothered as the stones themselves, whether the dark charcoal line had broken the slate beneath it. Hannah looked at the black mark, her shoulders shaking with the exhaustion of her own resistance, her voice breaking as she replied that the line was ugly and dark, but the stone itself remained solid and unchanged. She said she felt like that marked slate permanently defaced by her errors, carrying a dark history that could never be scraped away from the core of her life. Sister Sayan let her hand drop from Hannah's wrist. Her eyes turned toward the rain that was now falling in a steady silver sheet across the open garden. She told the young scribe that the mistake with the ink was like the charcoal line on the slate. It was a temporary mark drawn upon a surface that was infinitely deeper than the story written upon it. Sayan pointed out that Hannah's true torment did not come from the torn banner or the stained wood of the steps, for those were merely changing arrangements of form in a changing world. The suffering came from the stubborn, exhausting habit of treating every self-critical thought as if it were a permanent monument that defined her very soul. Hannah stood perfectly still on the wet cedar step, her eyes tracking the water as it began to pool across the dark slate slab in the center of the garden. For the first time since the winter gale, she did not lift the cloth to fight the stain, and she did not turn her mind inward to rehearse her own exile. She chose one small, subtle act of internal discipline. She simply dropped the hemp cloth onto the wood, sat down on the wet step in the downpour, and took a long, deep breath before her thoughts could convert the spilled ink into a final verdict on her goodness. She allowed the reality of the stained cedar to exist in the exact same space as her tired lungs, without needing to rewrite the afternoon or apologize for her existence. Watch how the heavy, dark charcoal line on the slab begins to alter its shape under the steady impact of the rain. The sharp, jagged edges are blurring, the black powder dissolving into the clear streams of water that are washing across the stone face, flowing down into the river sand below. The slate does not fight the ink, and it does not retain a memory of the dark text it carried an hour ago. It simply remains wide, solid, and entirely gray, its fundamental nature untouched by the story that has just dissolved into the dark. This was the quiet transformation, not a sudden, magical removal of the stain from the cedar wood, and not a state of immaculate, unblemished perfection. It was the simple decision to stop treating the remorseful thoughts in her head as absolute truths. As Hannah sat there in the open garden, the tight, throbbing band across her eyebrows began to loosen its grip, letting her awareness expand past the narrow boundary of her mistakes. She realized that the stone was clean precisely because it was spacious enough to let the rain wash it blank, and that her own living spirit was already whole, even while holding the jagged fragments of an imperfect day. When we cast our attention backward over the events of our own waking lives, we begin to decode the hidden structural mechanism that converts an accidental error into a lifelong sentence of internal exile. We often lie awake under the assumption that our exhaustion is a direct consequence of the physical weight of our chores or the complexity of our interpersonal entanglements. But if you observe the quiet, dull throb currently occupying the space right beneath your eyebrows, you will find that the real consumer of your vitality is the continuous hidden act of resistance. It is the energetic strain of refusing to let the past remain exactly where it fell, the desperate attempt to manipulate an unalterable reality through the application of your own suffering. We treat our minds as an active penal colony, continuously whipping our current muscles with the memory of an old misstep, operating under the tragic delusion that if we punish ourselves with enough severity, we will somehow rewrite the history of our choices. This is the exact point where we can begin to separate the original weight of existence from the elaborate psychological scaffolding the mind builds on top of it. Buddhist wisdom approaches this dilemma with a beautiful, direct distinction between the first pain and the second pain. The first pain is simply the raw, unpolished impact of being alive in a world constructed out of fragile parts. It is the sudden rip in the lineage banner. When the wind catches it, it is the dark, permanent puddle of black ink soaking into the cedar steps. It is the clumsy phrase that inadvertently left a sting in the ears of someone you care for. These occurrences are painful, yes, but they are also completely neutral events unfolding across a changing landscape. They belong to the basic, unpreventable coordinate system of human fallibility. We cannot control the arrival of the first pain. for the mountain gale does not check the strength of our fingers before it strikes. The true torment begins when our thoughts take that first pain and knead it into a permanent moral identity, actively constructing the second pain out of our own resistance. The second pain is the elaborate mental trial we host right behind our nose, where we translate an accidental event into a permanent verdict on our fundamental goodness. We do not simply notice a spilled jar. The mind turns inward and whispers, "Because you spilled that ink, you are a destructive presence who ruins everything beautiful." We do not just navigate a broken connection, our thoughts declare, "This injury is proof that your core is toxic." This is the mechanism of turning pain into identity, the unfortunate habit of mistaking a temporary charcoal line drawn across the slate for the actual substance of the stone beneath it. When we exist within this pattern of self-judgment, our awareness spends its late night hours rehearsing the future and replaying the past, frantically attempting to build a wall of hypervigilance against the terrifying landscape of uncertainty. We stay awake repeating the details of the error, because we believe that our guilt is a form of protection, that if we keep the memory raw and burning, we will somehow prevent ourselves from ever stumbling again. We develop an insatiable need for external approval, using the validation of others as a temporary bandage to numb the internal prosecutor we carry in our marrow. But trying to heal your unseen spirit through the accumulation of external praise is like trying to dry a wet flagstone by covering it with dust. The moisture remains trapped in the stone, waiting to rise the moment the sun goes down. True self-forgiveness does not manifest because you have finally found a way to execute a life entirely devoid of accidents. It begins with the radical, quiet realization that peace is not the absence of difficulty. It is an entirely different relationship with the difficulty itself. It is the willingness to look at the broken earthenware on your courtyard floor without immediately picking up the shards to cut your own chest. When you allow the reality of the error to exist without transforming it into a definitive commentary on your soul, you are stopping the second pain before it can plant its roots in your body. You are choosing to sit on the step in the rain, letting the ink be ink and letting the slate be slate, without needing to apologize to the universe for the size of your shadow. As you let the mattress support the heavy framework of your shoulders right now, notice how the desperate urge to fix your biography begins to lose its grip when it is met with simple, non-judgmental awareness. You do not have to settle the accounts of your entire life before the night ends, and you do not need to guarantee that your actions will be immaculate by tomorrow morning. The path toward inner freedom does not ask you to become a magically perfect creature who never drops a vial or tears a thread. It simply requires the very small, very steady discipline of noticing the critical loop behind your brow, naming it as the old courtroom, and refusing to give its declarations the authority of truth. You are the vast, open garden that holds both the stone and the weather. You are not the charcoal line that is currently dissolving in the dark. In a moment, this gentle insight will move even closer to the small, ordinary triggers of your daily life, showing us how to carry this soft hand into the waking world without guilt. But for now, let your attention sink down into the quiet, unmoving center of your lower abdomen. Let your ribcage expand outward on its own natural rhythm, taking up all the space it requires in the charcoal shadows, completely free from the narrow ledger sheets of human failure. You are safe enough to drop the prosecutorial brief right here, leaving your spirit as unblemished, wide, and receptive as the deep slate before the first mark was ever scratched into its surface. Now let this quiet understanding step softly across the centuries, moving out of the roofless stone gardens and directly into the small, electric friction of your ordinary evening. The splintered clay basin and the charcoal-stained slate we have been exploring are not abstract puzzles meant to live only inside an ancient text. They are the exact configurations of energy you hold behind your brow when you lie awake at midnight, staring at the faint blue glow of a screen, waiting for a text message that might validate an apology you sent hours ago. We live so much of our modern lives inside this digital hypervigilance, checking our devices for an external sign of absolution, replaying a perceived social mistake or an accidental slight, as if the repetition could somehow alter the text we already sent into the void. We pretend to be completely okay during the daylight hours, smiling while feeling an immense heavy thickness inside our chest, carrying the constant worry that we are fundamentally not enough compared to the smooth, seamless paths we see others displaying on our feeds. You can begin to transform this exhausting mechanism right in the middle of the very moments that cause your forehead to tighten, recognizing that peace is not an Alornithing victory, but a quality practiced in the smallest, most unexceptional slivers of the day. When you find yourself caught in the frantic urge to check your phone for reassurance, or when you are lying awake replaying an error at work, you are fully permitted to pause, a single slow breath taken before you type a defensive response, or review your past mistakes is a profound form of wisdom. It is a quiet, somatic realization that not every self-critical thought deserves your immediate obedience, and not every heavy feeling is a command that must be followed into an internal court case. You are simply stepping out into the open garden of your own presence, letting the dark charcoal lines of the mind pass over your head like summer rain, without allowing them to mar the permanent slate of your core. Perhaps you have spent years operating under the unconscious law that your right to rest must be bought with a continuous display of immaculate performance, and that wanting to let your eyes close while a mistake remains unresolved is a form of guilt-ridden failure. We treat our rest as an identity that must be earned through absolute flawlessness, fearing that if we stop scrubbing the steps or analyzing our stumbles, we will be cast out into the dark. But the coarse clay basin does not feel a shred of remorse for sitting empty under the drizzle, and the wet slate slab does not apologize to the open garden for letting the ink dissolve into the sand below. You can rest without earning it first. Your exhaustion is not a moral debt that must be settled through hours of overthinking it. It is simply the natural voice of an internal instrument that has run out of momentum from trying to collect the spilled water of an unchangeable past. It is entirely possible to care deeply about the people you love, your professional obligations, and the preservation of your connections without gripping their outcomes so fiercely that you crush your own fingers on the shards. When we attempt to control the future or rewrite the past through the continuous application of our own shame, we are acting like Hannah before her cloth was dropped, refusing to let the reality of the spill be exactly what it is. True inner freedom begins when you allow your living biography to be offered to the world with a loose, receptive hand. You can apologize for a misstep, offer your sincere amends, or complete your daily chores with the simple, unforced presence of a stone slab in the rain, letting the expression leave your fingers without demanding that it return to you with a guarantee of absolute safety the next time the creeping throb of regret settles behind the bridge of your nose. When you find yourself comparing your hidden, messy struggles to the manufactured timelines of those around you, look down at the quiet weight of your own body and take a slow breath. The accidental tear in the fabric or the clumsy phrase spoken in tension is merely the external weather of an unpredictable existence. You do not have to pretend the hurt did not happen, and you do not have to force an immediate state of complete healing before the raw edge has even cooled. It is completely enough to sit with the uncertainty of your own imperfect life, letting the irregular fragments of your day rest on the flagstones without needing to stamp them with the label of permanent unworthiness. In a few moments, the remaining definitions and scorecards of the daylight hours will dissolve entirely into the dark, leaving nothing but the vast protective space of this midnight room. As your limbs prepare to surrender their final defensive structures, release the illusion that you must fix the trajectory of every fallen vial before you are permitted to let your shoulders sink. The accounts of the day carry no authority in this quiet sanctuary, and the unresolved stains can remain suspended in the cool rain outside your window. Let your attention drop back down into the steady, unhurried rise and fall of your lower lungs, knowing that the pristine slate of your true nature is already fully intact, completely clean and entirely at peace. The dark hour has fully arrived now, and the quiet gravity of the night is settling over your bed like the thick, unmoving mist that holds the roofless stone garden in absolute stillness. Every single effort you made today, Every memory you replayed behind your eyes, and every anxious reach for reassurance has dropped its momentum, dissolving into the silence of this charcoal-colored room. The heavy, unalterable fragments of your biography are no longer pulling at your forehead, they have slid away, falling through the floorboards into the quiet earth, leaving your internal space completely empty, spacious, and cool. Your shoulders and your temples are sinking a fraction of an inch deeper into the support beneath you, as if the unblemished slate of your inner nature were finally remembering its relationship with the steady, unmoving foundation of the mountain. Let your breathing become very small, very quiet, and entirely effortless. There is absolutely no need to regulate the air as it moves down through your nose. The lungs know how to expand and soften on their own time, like the slow, steady tapping of the fine rain falling directly into the hollow interior of the clay basin. With every long, unhurried release of breath, the tight, defensive clenching that you held across your eyebrows is letting go of its grip. The charcoal lines of your old mistakes are no longer being tracked or verified by an internal court case. The hemp cloths have been dropped onto the wet steps. The ink pots are resting on the wood, and the stone flagstones have completely vanished beneath a blanket of silent, protective dark. You have permission to stop solving your life for tonight. The broken earthenware, the spilled tonics, and the strategies for tomorrow do not require your presence while the world is cold. They can remain suspended in the shadows outside your window, completely separate from the living form that is resting here in the quiet. You are under no obligation to repair your entire history before your eyes are allowed to close. You are permitted to be unwritten, unmeasured, and completely finished with the trial, resting within the safe sanctuary of an uncompromised night that asks for no explanations before it offers you its blanket of rest. The teaching of the wide, rain-washed stone is settling deep into the marrow of your bones now, filling the heavy spaces behind your brow with an enveloping tenderness. You are returning home to the pristine cleanliness that was always waiting beneath your desire to change the past, the vast, unblemished awareness that cannot be stained, because it belongs to the open sky of your own presence. Let the universe carry its own silent turning for the next few hours, while your spirit drifts further away from the language of human metrics and transactional guilt. Your jaw is loose, your eyelids are heavy like wet cedar leaves, resting in the shade, and the cool, still rhythm of the evening is cradling your weary body as you prepare to slide away into a deep, peaceful, and dreamless sleep. What if the slate of your spirit was already entirely clean, long before the first charcoal line was ever drawn across its surface? The smooth, dark face of the stone does not carry the weight of what was written upon it yesterday, nor does the empty basin demand that the rain explain why it falls into the hollow center, instead of clearing the stain on the path outside. All the heavy, frantic loops of the waking hours, the desperate attempts to outrun a clumsy word or rewrite an accidental moment of haste, and the quiet, internal court case you have been hosting behind your nose, all of it is being washed clean by the unhurried current of the dark night air. The mind can finally cease its vigilance because there is no permanent fortress left to defend and no grand architecture left to complete. You are simply here, a quiet form breathing in a quiet room, completely released from the burden of proving your goodness to a world that is already asleep. When we look into the deep space of the heart, we find that the true nature of our awareness is not like a brittle sheet of glass that shatters when it is struck by a critical thought. It is much more like the wide open sky that allows the mountain storms to rage, the gray clouds to gather, and the lightning to strike, without ever retaining a single scar or losing its fundamental clarity. The regrets that felt so heavy this afternoon were never your identity. They were merely dark charcoal lines drifting through your vast, internal sky. You do not need to fight the weather, and you do not need to blame yourself for the rain. You only need to let the storm pass through, allowing the space inside your chest to remain wide, soft, and unbothered by the passing shadows. Think of how much energy it has taken to maintain the illusion of a flawless surface, to hide the natural cracks in your clay from the eyes of those who demanded perfection. That constant holding, that perpetual balancing of stones, is the very thing that has made your spirit feel so thin and brittle at the end of the day. But tonight, The fires in the valley have completely gone out, and the broken pieces have been returned to the earth. The cracks are not your failure. They are simply the places where your living being has chosen to open up, letting the rigid boundaries dissolve so that the cool, healing night can find its way inside. You do not need to patch your wounds with shame or hide your exhaustion behind a forced smile. The darkness around you does not judge your unfinished edges. It simply folds itself around you, offering a safe, uncompromised sanctuary where you are permitted to be exactly as you are. Let your awareness sink even lower now, past the quiet rhythm of your chest, down into the absolute stillness of your abdomen. Feel the profound, heavy weight of your legs and your hips as they press into the bedding, completely anchored by the steady, unmoving ground beneath you. The earth has been carrying the weight of the mountains, the rivers, and the giant boulders for millions of winters without a single complaint. And it is fully capable of carrying your tired body tonight. You do not need to hold yourself up anymore. You do not need to stay alert to anticipate the demands of tomorrow. Every unfinished project, every unreciprocated act of care, and every unspoken judgment be left behind on the cold road outside, losing its shape in the growing fog. The breath is becoming so thin, so soft, and so quiet that it feels like nothing more than a gentle ripple moving through a dark, undisturbed pool. There is no longer any boundary between the quietness of the room and the quietness of your own mind. The thoughts that were circling so frantically a few hours ago have lost their solid forms, turning into faint, wispy shadows that dissolve the moment they touch the deep water of your presence. You are returning to the ancient, untroubled home that existed before the first human standard was ever written down, the silent, uncarved space where you are already complete, already valued, and already deeply at peace. Let the final remnants of the day slide away completely now, leaving your spirit as open, hollow, and spacious as the empty well frame resting under the autumn drizzle. There are no ledger to balance, no scores to keep, and no versions of yourself to defend in this beautiful, velvety dark. The world will continue its turning without your effort, and the morning will bring its own light on its own time. But right now, in this single inch of pure presence, nothing is required of you but the simple willingness to let go of the mallet and fall asleep. Let your mind dissolve into the heavy rhythmic peace of your body, allowing your weary soul to slide effortlessly into a deep, unbroken, and dreamless rest. The cool slate of the open courtyard remains perfectly still beneath the silver descent of the midnight sky, holding no permanent scar from the charcoal lines that were dragged across its face during the daylight hours. We accumulate an immense, silent fatigue when we treat our minds as a constant restoration project, trying to scrub every dark corner of our history as if our right to occupy space depended on an unblemished record. But in this quiet hour, the rain falling outside your window does not ask the earth to prove its worth before it agrees to cool the parched clay, and the darkness does not require your choices to be perfect before it folds you in its protective embrace. You are permitted to step away from the heavy ledgers of your memory tonight, leaving the ledger book wide open on the desk, completely finished with the exhausting habit of acting as your own prosecutor. When we look directly into the space right behind your eyebrows, we can see that true compassion is not a complex meditative technique or a state of sudden, magical enlightenment that removes all human regret. It is simply the quiet willingness to sit on the damp cedar step beside the spilled ink, allowing the stain to be exactly what it is, without converting that accidental event into a definitive commentary on your fundamental nature. The mind creates the second wound when it takes the raw texture of a mistake and kneads it into a permanent identity, whispering that because you caused an unintended ripple of pain, you are a toxic presence who does not deserve to find comfort. But the person who committed that error has already dissolved into the fluid stream of the past. The flesh resting against your sheets tonight is entirely new, its cells completely free from the old trajectory, its lungs breathing an air that has never been touched by the previous year's stumble. Let the lingering tension along your jaw and beneath your temples turn completely open now, as if the tight knots were merely soft charcoal dust being washed away by a gentle internal rainfall. You do not have to solve the complications of your relationships before your eyelids are permitted to grow heavy. and you do not have to guarantee that your life will look immaculately ordered by the time the morning light breaks across the room. The path toward inner freedom begins in these very small, unexceptional moments of the night when you notice a self-critical thought arising. Name it gently as the old courtroom, and refuse to give its harsh declarations the weight of absolute truth. You are the vast, silent garden that contains both the stone and the weather. You are not the dark mark that is currently dissolving into the sand below. Your limbs are remembering their natural weight, sinking effortlessly into the deep support beneath you as the desperate urge to fix your biography finally runs completely out of momentum. The heavy iron tools of your daily performance have been laid down in the grass. The long, difficult effort of trying to buy your safety through perfection is over, and the world asks nothing more of your hands for the next few hours. Every clumsy phrase spoken in tension, every accidental oversight, and every unresolved blame can remain exactly where it fell on the road outside, losing its structural power in the growing dark. You are safe enough to drop the defensive armor right here, letting your breath become so thin, so quiet, and so unhurried that it feels like nothing more than a gentle ripple moving through a cool mountain pool. The separation between the wide, unmoving stillness of the courtyard and the spaciousness inside your own chest is fading away entirely now, leaving nothing but a clean, empty room cradled by the dark. The thoughts that were twisting into intricate knots a few hours ago are losing their sharp definitions, melting away like evening smoke dissolving over the distant ridges until the stone face of your awareness is completely gray, blank, and untroubled by memory. You are home in the silent sanctuary of your own being, a clean and receptive vessel resting on the solid ground, entirely released from the requirement to produce a melody or justify your existence through a display of perfect symmetry. Let your mind dissolve completely into the heavy, rhythmic peace of your body, allowing your weary soul to slide effortlessly into a deep, peaceful, and dreamless sleep. The quiet downpour in the roofless garden continues to wash across the deep gray slate, its cool water smoothing the stone face without checking to see if the marks left by the charcoal have been fully apologized for or completely erased by hand. We carry an immense, silent fatigue through our modern days when we treat our own spirit as a broken vessel that must be continuously reassembled through the mechanism of shame, believing that if we judge our past clumsiness harshly enough, we will finally earn our right to be clean. But the large clay basin sitting in the courtyard does not hold a grudge against the fingers that dropped it, and it does not diminish its own capacity to receive the fresh rain because a previous medicine was spilled across the floor. You are fully permitted to lay down the heavy cloth of your overthinking tonight, allowing the unalterable details of your history to rest exactly where they fell, without needing to bleed your own fingers on the broken shards. When we look into the deep, quiet room behind your brow, we find that the true source of your Latinite restlessness is not the mistake itself, but the tight, defensive resistance that refuses to let that moment remain in the past. Buddhist wisdom describes this state of mind as the great illusion of control, the desperate, exhausting habit of replaying an old conversation or a sudden accident over and over, as if the sheer force of our mental anxiety could somehow alter a script that is already hardened into stone. The first pain is simply the raw condition of living a human life, the accidental tear in the fabric, the misjudged phrase spoken in a moment of exhaustion, or the unintended ripple that brought a shadow into someone else's space. We cannot always stop the first pain from arriving, for it belongs to a changing world of limitation. But we create the second wound when we knead that event into our marrow and declare that we are fundamentally broken because we stumbled in the dark. Let the small, tight muscles along the bridge of your nose and across the wide expanse of your forehead turn completely open now, like a piece of wet slate, letting the dark ink dissolve into the clear mountain stream below. You do not have to guarantee that your life will look immaculate by tomorrow morning. And you do not have to find a way to patch every cracked relationship before your eyes are permitted to grow heavy. True peace is not a state where we never commit an error or experience. Regret it is a completely different relationship with our own imperfections. a soft willingness to sit with the reality of our unfinished lives without using our memories as weapons to punish our current flesh. The person who made that mistake has already dissolved into the stream of time. The body resting beneath your linen tonight is entirely new, its cells unblemished by the past, its heart beating to a rhythm that belongs entirely to this single, clean inch of the present hour. Your limbs are becoming beautifully heavy now, every muscle and joint surrendering its final defensive postures to the deep, unhurried pull of the ground beneath you. The heavy iron mallets of your daily performance have been dropped into the grass. The long, difficult effort of trying to buy your safety through absolute flawlessness is over. And the dark room asks nothing more of your hands. Every clumsy oversight, every accidental slight, and every unresolved blame can remain exactly where it is, suspended in the cool drizzle outside your window, losing its substance in the growing fog. You are safe enough to drop the prosecutorial brief right here, letting your breath become so thin, so soft, and so quiet that it feels like nothing more than a gentle ripple moving through a still mountain pool that has completely run out of wind. The artificial boundaries between the wide, open garden and the stillness inside your own chest are fading away entirely into the charcoal shadows, leaving nothing but a vast receptive presence cradled by the night. The thoughts that were twisting into intricate knots a few hours ago are losing their sharp definitions, melting away like evening smoke, dissolving over the distant ridges until the stone face of your awareness is completely gray, blank, and untroubled by memory. You are home in the silent sanctuary of your own being, a clean and receptive vessel resting on the solid earth, entirely released from the requirement to produce a melody or justify your existence through a display of perfect symmetry. Let your mind dissolve completely into the heavy, rhythmic peace of your body, allowing your weary soul to slide effortlessly into a deep, peaceful, and dreamless sleep.